Hello class. This lecture is going to cover the topics of revising and editing, a step a lot of y'all don't do, but really all of y'all should do. Now I am using, exaggerated advertising by saying that you can change a C paper to an A with revising and editing. I mean, if you have a failing paper and put some thought into it to fixing your mistakes and making the ideas, which are usually pretty good, more expressed to the reader, you can turn it into a passing paper. So far as if we're being literal for this class, though, if you have a C paper and you take it to the tutoring center or have the online tutoring service review it, take into account their considerations and polish it off some more on your own as well. I mean, there's no reason why you can't literally get your okay paper to really good. So I just want to define and distinguish between revising and editing. Revision is going through the process of reading over your work and trying to look at what you've said and improve how it sounds. Find a better way to say it, find the right words, deal with some of the issues and make things that aren't clear. Usually we have really good ideas that we can't translate onto the page. Well, you have to really put them on the page and then divorce yourself from the idea in your head. So, if you look at your stuff, try and read it for what it is on the paper and then work to clarify it, make it seem clearer, make it stand out. Again, sometimes it's the right wording, sometimes it's moving stuff around. Editing is fixing your mistakes, and again, for this class to have made it this far, these are probably more careless mistakes, but also some more difficult words. You might not get caught. Sometimes, things make their way through the grammar checker on your word processor. There's a saying, nothing's written well, everything's rewritten well. So here are some tips for how to do this more effectively. Plan out your time so that you can come back to your work after you've let it air out and spaced out. If you just drain your brain juice trying to make your essay, you're not going to want to look at it, and you're not going to overcome some of your own bias that you want to be done with an assignment. Usually when we look at our own essay, we think, oh, it's great, and we're so impressed with ourselves, and so that's why it's especially shocking when the grade comes around and we just didn't do a good enough job making sure that the ideas transfer their way to the paper. You might try reading your essay out loud. Wherever you stumble, you get bored, you run out of breath, these are where the flow of your writing is not working out. If you get a friend of yours to do the same thing, you might have similar effects. You'll want to seek out peer review and have some kind of justification if you ignore comments, and if you utilize them, great. Be sure you're not getting someone to do the work for you because it's your assignment. You'll want to look for mistakes that you frequently make in your writing. I use a few words too often, although and however. These are, contrary statements, contrary conjunctions. They're almost like a really big but in a sentence. And a but means, well, now that we talked about this, there's still this other stuff we need to talk about, or it's not related or whatever. But if you use line up those, buts or howevers or all those, you're saying this is the opposite of what came before, and then what comes next is the opposite of this. But hey, those few things might have been similar to each other. Anywho, I would highly recommend reading your essay backwards as well. You want to estrange yourself from your ideas, and so this will make you ensure that your ideas and your paragraphs are fully developed and that they move to each other. If you're utterly confused at the end, the previous sentence should help clarify that, and sometimes it doesn't. Consequently, a graphic organizer will help you deconstruct your essay. You'll be able to, if you use a Venn diagram, you can kind of see how your ideas lead to one another. It could also help set up, compare and contrast between certain topics or notions. These are key to help you kind of categorize things. Don't get stuck with how they're structured necessarily. You don't have to follow this. You have to make the paper readable. But sometimes visualizing your essay in a different way than just a pile of words is a good way to generate new ideas when you're kind of stuck there at the end. You'll also then be able to move them around in a way that's easier than just copying paragraphs or sentences, which maybe you might not then fix after you've done so. Again, there's some things you can ask yourself about your essays as you get more developed in your writing, or you become an English teacher where you grade these things. They become innate, but you want to walk through these when reviewing your essay deliberately so that you can start getting in the habit of looking at it. If you say something in your head that then is not on the page, well, now you know what to add to the page and make sure it's not only in your head. You should understand the purpose of your assignment and make sure that it's being addressed in the assignment itself, and you're also writing it to a proper, appropriate audience. Again, these all go together by the nature of the assignment, but later on you'll be having a range of different types of audiences for your reading. Now, certainly you can build to a main thesis and have it be revealed at the end in some kind of twist, but I always think this is kind of manipulative in writing or kind of hokey. And I need to see that you can write a thesis, so you're going to want to make sure that's early on and it's very clearly expressed. You want to see if you have enough reasons and evidence to support and back up that thesis. Again, how much is enough? Enough's enough. Make sure it's clear why you have as much as you do. You want to pay to mind, both if you have enough ideas and how they connect to each other. Ask yourself, why does this come after the previous paragraph, or why is it before? Where are we going? You also want to be sure to not move on from a topic before you fully developed the idea and exhausted and talked about everything you can that's appropriate. Lastly, then, of course, you want to then think, well, is my conclusion or intro good enough for the great essay I've written already? Some things to think about for your essay would be, again, in regards to the purpose and languages, or the purpose and audience, is first think about your language. You have to find the sweet spot of not being too shallow or basic, amateurish even, and then consider if you need to then include the right amount of terminology and not get into jargon. You also have to consider if you need to define some more of the basic terminology, or you can presume that your audience knows this. Think of what level you're at, and then that will help you kind of figure this out. You want to then remember the key words of both the assignment as well as what you're talking about. More keywords would guide then how you're doing, what you're doing in your essay, and so you want to make sure that you achieve that as well. Transitions are also a way to situate things and show that progression. You're writing for, of course, the instructor, so you want to show that you thought about the essay, you weren't careless in how you were moving through things, but you also want to sound like you know what you're talking about, and that you make it clear that you didn't just get very basic sources then as the basis for your research paper or persuasive paper when you're doing arguments and looking for proof. But also remember, don't analyze when you have to synthesize. Don't compare and contrast when you have to make an argument. Sometimes a lot of the assignments can blur together, so just make sure you're clarifying things clearly. Think of it this way: a process analysis of how to do something is not that different from then argument persuasive paper when you're saying you should do this and here's how easy it is. A compare and contrast is similar to an argument if you're looking at something like, here's two things and which one we should do. You just want to make sure then in that case that you're clear about what you are doing through the whole thing. You want to think about your thesis especially. It's pretty important and easy to get wrong. You have to find the sweet spot with the thesis. You want to not be too vague, but you can't get too specific because you're saying this is what I'm going to talk about, and these are the parts of it that we have to talk about. It also has to then preview the organization of the rest of your essay, so you need to then lay out, well, the first phase of my essay will cover so and so forth, and whatever. If you need a position in your essay, it should be laid out in the thesis, and you have the opportunity then to say, rather than no, this is good, this is bad, or I support this, to find the right language of saying, if something's justified or unjustified, will be effective or ineffective, or any other kind of terminology when dealing with this. Lastly, when you think about the organization of your whole essay, you want to have a good reason for saying why we have to talk about this first, why this next, so on and so forth. If you don't have that, then it's probably something you haven't thought of, and so your essays won't flow together until you consciously make the effort to do so. Again, consider the ways we can handle organization of essays. If you can't think of, well, that we have to talk about this first, and then we have to get to that. The gist of this slide, of course, is saying do your intro, conclusions, and titles. Do what they're supposed to do, and if not, but you still think they're good, keep it. Usually the weak intro is going to be a general kind of quick, very basic summary of, oh, this is something that's important, or the world today, many things are affecting this. And so you just want to maybe think of something more specific or better than that. A conclusion, of course, then is a good way to end things, and you have to ask, how have I done that? Again, my main advice for conclusions is just grappling with the question of what comes next, to look ahead. And if that's the case, then you're going to be fine. I don't penalize or give bonuses for good titles, but you want to think once you're done writing the whole thing, if the title appropriately reflects what you've done and all the work you put into it. But again, it's not entirely necessary. Again, each paragraph is talking about one thing that's a part of your overall topic, and so early on you might just go on and on with really lengthy paragraphs, but you're going to want to rein in during the revising and editing process the length of those paragraphs to where you can control the flow, to where you can, guide your reader. And again, think of stacking up the details like a stack of plates is just going to cause the whole thing to crash down. And so in the case of it's not going to crash down, or your reader's not going to have some violent reaction to it, they're going to, stop reading or lose track. And are they going to really want to go back to where they think they got lost and keep going? Try and think, where am I introducing something new? And then let that be where you break up the paragraphs. A lot of times you'll be talking about something and you bring up something that just comes to your mind and you just keep going, and that little sentence or few sentences really belongs on its own in a later paragraph or somewhere earlier, and so you just gotta literally move your sentences around. If something is only talked about briefly, maybe it's not appropriate to leave it in the whole thing. You'll want to look at your sentences and just make sure you're not tripping over the extraneous clauses or being guilty of any run-on or fragments. But you also want to then, these control the flow of the reading. So sometimes you have to go on and on. Sometimes you can say things really shorter. And, to make make a stronger point, a shorter direct sentence is useful. But then that also is good for tying together a bunch of detailed information, which you can't cut down and shorten it. You want to use strong, active language, and you want to make sure the whole thing kind of flows the appropriate way and has parallel structure, in the sense that you talk about and you lay out the sentence pretty much the same way each time. In the case of don't open with a preposition and then have your main clause and objects and that sort of stuff. I can't go into this too much now because it's presumed that you know this, but that the literal components of the sentence, you want to keep going. Personally, for me, my natural mistakes that I make are to maybe put the object earlier in the sentence as opposed to after receiving the action. So just be very mindful of what you're doing in that sense. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're probably guilty of a lot of it. So just read what you've done and try and polish it off until you're happy with it. Again, more specific suggestions for how to revise your stuff from the book. Don't be wordy. Just say what you're saying and get to the point. And a lot of times people also just repeat themselves or reword what they just said. So you want to avoid doing that. That's redundancy, and really it's more in artistic and creative writing and endeavors, not, expository or academic writing. You don't need to open up sentences with generic basic transition statements, or even then, like once upon a time or in the world today, studies show, because you're going to be talking about that stuff right away. Adverbs and adjectives are divisive. People think you should avoid them completely. Others are like, well, they're just one of your tools as a writer. Make sure, though, these things are the labels of your writing, and so make sure those labels are earned. And if you earn those labels, say how something is unjustified, how something was poorly thought, conceived, or done, that will become clear if you talk about it, as opposed to saying that things are that way. We've covered the basics of tone, diction, word choice, and how you sound to your reader already. But when you're revising and editing, you want to really make sure that you're using the appropriate tone and words for what you're talking about. And so here's a good chance to brush up on what this means and how you want to sound. Whereas finding the right words is pretty simple, and looking up in a thesaurus, not for every single term, but some of your more important statements, or the statements you're not quite satisfied with the feel of, because usually if you think something feels right, and that feeling is not just because you want to be done already, you are doing good work. But again, academic diction is usually third person. You'll want to usually avoid connotations and focus on denotative language. Of course, you want your spelling, punctuation, and grammar to be correct, and you want to use standardized vocabulary and avoid using slang or regional dialect. So proofreading or editing your own work is best a team effort. If you have someone helping you, you'll have a better chance of doing it, because if you make a mistake and you don't know the right way to do it, how can you find out what was done? However, usually our mistakes are careless, and so what you want to do is, when looking to fix your paper, don't try to fix every single mistake all at once. Read through as much as you can till you find one mistake of a certain type, and then look for the next mistake, and then next mistake, and next mistake, until you make it through the whole paper. So in this case, I'm looking for a spelling error. I'll read it, I find one, okay, now I'll start over. Looking for a punctuation error, great. A usage or verb agreement, or antecedent consistency, any kind of thing that you want to look for. Or you could just boil it down to punctuation, grammar, mechanics, or whatever. Again, read your essay backwards to confuse yourself and force you to look at the essay for what it is, not how you remember your ideas to be. Read it out loud, get some help looking at it. Here's some general tips that I'll also tie into the peer review assignments again, but you'll want to give your readers and reviewers a readable copy. Don't give them your roughest draft, even though you need their help probably frequently. You'll want to at least polish it off some before you give it to them. Make sure they understand the assignment, or even perhaps give them the essay assignment sheet you've been given by your instructor. Be open to whatever criticism and new ideas they might propose. If it's just generalities, it's probably rightfully ignored, but still, you want to listen to what they have to say. You're not obligated to accept the advice, but really you don't want to seem ungrateful or like you're not able to handle the criticism. Now, here are some suggestions for when you are a peer reviewer yourself. Make sure you look at the whole thing completely before you start commenting or offering any judgments. Oftentimes I'll be reviewing an essay and the issue I want to raise comes up in the next paragraph or comes up a little later on. So, I quickly have to amend my commentary. Focus on what's there on the page more so than what you think or what your response is. You're trying to not add to it, but make the ideas clearer and better. try to be positive, but also try and be specific without offering just platitudes or generalities. Make your little comments and notes on the paper and also summarize the whole thing. And be sure to always make whatever suggestions you can.